Maya Chun had perfected the art of being invisible. At 28, she moved through the world like a shadow, her small frame and quiet demeanor allowing her to blend seamlessly into any crowd. Working as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company in San Diego, she spent her days buried in spreadsheets and algorithms, speaking only when spoken to, eating lunch alone at her desk while her colleagues gathered in the break room, sharing stories and laughter. Her apartment reflected this same understated existence. Clean, organized, minimal furniture, everything in neutral tones. The only splash of color came from a small succulent garden on her windowsill and a single-frame photograph of her younger brother Danny in his army dress uniform, taken just weeks before his deployment to Afghanistan 3 years ago. Maya's routine rarely varied. Wake at 5:30, 30 minutes of yoga in her living room, shower, coffee, work, home, dinner for one, reading, sleep. Weekends meant grocery shopping, laundry, and long walks along the beach where she could watch the sunset without having to make conversation with anyone. She had built a comfortable, predictable life that required minimal interaction with others and maximum control over her environment. The invitation to her company's annual summer barbecue had arrived via email 2 weeks earlier. Maya had immediately planned to decline with her usual excuse about feeling under the weather, but her supervisor Jennifer had cornered her in the hallway that morning. "Maya, I really hope you'll come to the barbecue this Saturday," Jennifer had said, her voice carrying that particular tone bosses use when a request isn't really a request. "The whole team will be there, and honestly, I think it would be good for you to socialize a bit more with your colleagues." Maya had nodded and mumbled something about checking her schedule, knowing full well that her weekend held no commitments beyond her regular solitary activities. But Jennifer's expectant smile had made declining feel impossible, so she found herself standing in her bedroom that Saturday morning, staring at her modest wardrobe and trying to decide what one wore to a company barbecue. She settled on dark jeans and a loose-fitting blue cotton shirt with 3/4 sleeves, an outfit that would keep her covered while hopefully not drawing attention to how overdressed or underdressed she might be compared to her colleagues. The shirt was one of her favorites, comfortable and soft from years of wear, with sleeves that reached just below her elbows. The barbecue was being held at Sunset Cliffs Natural Park, a popular spot where dramatic sandstone cliffs met the Pacific Ocean. Maya had walked these very cliffs countless times during her solitary weekend wanderings, but today the familiar landscape felt foreign, crowded with folding chairs, portable grills, and clusters of her coworkers engaged in animated conversations. She arrived precisely at the start time listed on the invitation, which turned out to be a mistake. Only Jennifer and a few early arrivals were there, setting up tables and arranging coolers. Maya immediately regretted not waiting another hour to arrive when the crowd would have been larger and her presence less noticeable. "Maya, you made it," Jennifer called out, waving her over to where she was arranging paper plates and plastic utensils on a long folding table. "I'm so glad you decided to come. Here, can you help me with these napkins?" For the next hour, Maya found herself conscripted into setup duties, which actually proved to be a relief. Having specific tasks gave her a purpose and an excuse not to engage in small talk with arriving colleagues. She focused intently on arranging condiment bottles, folding napkins, and filling water dispensers, grateful for the familiar comfort of having something concrete to accomplish. As more people arrived, the gathering took on the relaxed energy typical of company social events. Groups formed naturally around shared interests and office friendships, leaving Maya to drift between clusters without quite belonging to any of them. She made polite conversation when directly addressed, nodded appropriately during stories about weekend adventures and family updates, and gradually worked her way toward the quieter edges of the gathering. The food was served buffet style, giving Maya another opportunity to occupy herself with a specific activity. She waited until the initial rush had died down before approaching the serving table, loading her plate with modest portions of grilled chicken, potato salad, and corn on the cob. She found an empty spot at a picnic table slightly removed from the main cluster of activities and settled in to eat while observing the social dynamics playing out around her. From her vantage point, she could see her colleagues in a different light than their usual office environment provided. Tom from accounting was telling animated stories about his teenage son's baseball season. Lisa from marketing was showing off photos of her recent vacation to Italy. The normally stern finance director was laughing loudly at something one of the junior analysts had said. Everyone seemed more relaxed, more human somehow, outside the confines of their professional roles. Maya was finishing her corn on the cob when she noticed a commotion near the main seating area. A group of people had gathered around someone who appeared to be in distress. She could hear fragments of concerned voices carrying on the ocean breeze. Is he okay? Should someone call 911? Does anyone know first aid? Maya's training kicked in before her natural inclination towards self-preservation could stop her. She had spent 2 years as a volunteer EMT during college, skills she hadn't used since graduation, but knowledge that remained sharp and ready. Without fully conscious thought, she found herself moving toward the crowd, her earlier invisibility forgotten. At the center of the gathering, she found Marcus, one of the senior developers, sitting on the ground with his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead. His left hand was pressed against his chest, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. What happened? Maya asked, dropping to her knees beside him. Started feeling dizzy during volleyball. Marcus managed between labored breaths. Chest feels tight. Can't seem to catch my breath. Maya quickly assessed his condition, her mind automatically running through the protocols she had learned years earlier. Possible heart attack, heat exhaustion, anxiety attack, or several other conditions that could present with similar symptoms. Without proper medical equipment, her options were limited, but she could at least provide basic care and help determine if emergency services were needed. Marcus, I'm going to check a few things, okay? She said, her voice calm and professional. Can you tell me if you have any history of heart problems? While he shook his head, Maya gently placed her fingers on his wrist to check his pulse. Rapid, but regular. She observed his breathing pattern, the color of his skin, the level of alertness in his eyes. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, checking for obvious signs of distress while mentally cataloging symptoms. Someone needs to call 911, announced Jennifer, pulling out her phone. Wait, Maya said, her voice carrying unexpected authority. Let me assess him first. Marcus, have you eaten anything today? Had enough water? Just coffee this morning, he admitted. Been playing volleyball for the past hour in this heat. Maya nodded, the pieces falling into place. She looked around at the concerned faces surrounding them and realized she had somehow become the center of attention, a position she normally avoided at all costs. But Marcus needed help, and her discomfort with being noticed seemed trivial compared to his immediate medical needs. I think this might be heat exhaustion combined with dehydration, she told the group. We need to get him cooled down and hydrated. Can someone give me a bottle of water and some ice from the coolers? Several people hurried away to fetch the requested items while Maya continued her assessment. She helped Marcus move to a shaded area under one of the canopy tents that had been set up for the event and encouraged him to loosen his collar and remove his shoes to help his body cool down. You seem to know what you're doing, observed a voice from behind her. Maya glanced over her shoulder to see a man she didn't recognize standing slightly apart from the crowd. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-30s, with short dark hair and intense green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore simple khaki shorts and a navy blue polo shirt, but something in his posture and the way he observed the situation suggested a background in emergency situations. I used to be an EMT, Maya explained briefly, then turned her attention back to Marcus as someone handed her a bottle of cold water. Small sips, she instructed Marcus. Don't drink too fast, or you might get nauseous. The stranger moved closer, positioning himself where he could observe both Maya's treatment of Marcus and the reactions of the crowd around them. Something about his presence felt different from the concerned, but ultimately helpless energy of her coworkers. He seemed prepared to act if needed, alert in a way that suggested training and experience. Over the next 20 minutes, Maya worked methodically to address Marcus's symptoms. She applied ice packs to his neck and wrist to help cool his core temperature, monitored his pulse and breathing, and gradually increased his fluid intake as his condition stabilized. Her movements were confident and purposeful, drawing on knowledge and skills that felt rusty from disuse but remained fundamentally sound. "You're looking better," she told Marcus as his color began to return to normal and his breathing became less labored. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, actually," he said, sounding surprised. "The dizziness is gone, and my chest doesn't feel tight anymore." Maya nodded, satisfied with his improvement, but still cautious about the situation. "You should probably take it easy for the rest of the day. Stay in the shade, keep drinking water, and avoid any strenuous activity. If you start feeling dizzy or short of breath again, you need to get to a doctor immediately." The crowd began to disperse as it became clear that Marcus was going to be fine, people returning to their interrupted conversations and activities with the relieved energy that follows a successfully resolved crisis. Maya started to gather up the ice packs and empty water bottles, preparing to fade back into the background now that her unexpected moment of usefulness had passed. "That was impressive," the stranger said, appearing beside her as she cleaned up. "How long were you in EMT?" 2 years during college," Maya replied without looking up from her task. "It's been a while since I've had to use any of that training." "It showed that you knew what you were doing," he said. "I'm Commander Jake Sullivan, by the way. Navy SEALs." Maya finally looked up, taking in his extended hand and the casual way he had mentioned his military affiliation. She shook his hand briefly, noting the firm grip and callous palms that suggested regular physical activity. "Maya, Chun, I work with this group." She gestured vaguely toward her colleagues. "Data analyst?" She nodded, surprised by his correct guess. "You have a systematic thinking approach," he explained. "The way you assessed the situation, gathered information, made decisions based on evidence. Good qualities for both emergency medicine and data analysis." Maya wasn't sure how to respond to the compliment, so she simply nodded and continued cleaning up. She was acutely aware that their conversation was drawing glances from her coworkers, probably wondering who the stranger was and why he was talking to Maya, of all people. "Are you here with someone from the company?" she asked, trying to redirect attention away from herself. "Jennifer invited me. We went to college together, and I'm in town for a few weeks between deployments. She thought I might enjoy getting out and meeting some people." Maya glanced toward Jennifer, who was deep in conversation with a group from the marketing department. It made sense that her supervisor would know someone in the military. Jennifer had mentioned her college days occasionally, usually in the context of networking and maintaining professional relationships. "That was nice of her," Maya said, for lack of anything more substantive to contribute to the conversation. "She mentioned that most of her team would be here today," Jake continued. "Said there were some really talented people working for the company that I should meet." Maya wondered if Jennifer had specifically mentioned her, then immediately dismissed the thought. There was no reason her supervisor would single her out to a visiting friend, especially not someone with Commander Sullivan's obvious confidence and social ease. They existed in completely different worlds. "I should probably go check on Marcus again," Maya said, looking for a polite way to end the conversation and return to her comfortable anonymity. "Good idea. Heat exhaustion can be tricky. Sometimes people feel better temporarily and then crash again if they overdo it." His knowledge of medical conditions surprised her slightly, though she supposed military training would include extensive first aid and emergency response preparation. She nodded and headed toward where Marcus was sitting in the shade, sipping water and looking much more like his normal self. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Maya checked on Marcus periodically, making sure he stayed hydrated and didn't attempt to rejoin any of the more strenuous activities. She helped with cleanup when the event began winding down, grateful to have specific tasks that kept her occupied and useful without requiring extensive social interaction. As people began packing up chairs and loading coolers into cars, Maya realized she had managed to get through an entire company social event without it being completely terrible. The medical emergency had given her a role to play and a way to contribute that felt natural and comfortable. For a few hours, she had been visible by necessity rather than choice, and the experience had been less painful than anticipated. She was folding one of the canopy tents when Jennifer approached with Commander Sullivan in tow. "Maya, I wanted to thank you again for helping Marcus today," Jennifer said. "That could have been really scary if you hadn't known what to do." "Anyone with basic first aid training would have done the same thing," Maya replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "But most people don't have that training," Jake interjected, "and even fewer would have stayed calm enough to use it effectively in that situation. You probably prevented a much more serious medical emergency." Maya felt her cheeks warming under the attention and focused intently on the tent pole she was collapsing, hoping the flush wouldn't be visible to the two people watching her. "Jake was telling me he's been deployed all over the world," Jennifer continued. "Maya, you would probably find his stories interesting. You're both the analytical types who like understanding how things work." Maya glanced up briefly, meeting Jake's eyes for a moment before looking away again. She had the uncomfortable feeling that Jennifer was trying to play matchmaker, a thought that made her stomach clench with anxiety. The last thing she wanted was to be the object of anyone's romantic speculation, especially involving someone so obviously out of her league. "I'm sure Commander Sullivan has more interesting things to do during his leave than listen to me talk about spreadsheets," Maya said with a self-deprecating smile. "Actually, I'd be interested to know what kind of data analysis you do," Jake replied. "A lot of military operations depend on good intelligence analysis, pattern recognition, trend identification, risk assessment. I bet there's more overlap between our jobs than you might think." Despite herself, Maya found the comparison intriguing. She had never thought about her work in terms of intelligence analysis, but there were indeed similarities in the methodical approach to gathering and interpreting information. "Maybe we could continue this conversation over coffee sometime," Jake suggested. "I'm still learning my way around San Diego, and Jennifer mentioned you're a local." The invitation hung in the air for a moment while Maya's mind raced through possible responses. Part of her was flattered by his interest, but a larger part was terrified by the prospect of extended one-on-one conversation with someone so confident and accomplished. She was much better at being helpful in crisis situations than at maintaining casual social interactions. "That's very kind of you to offer," she said carefully, "but I'm sure you'll want to spend your leave time with more exciting company than a data analyst. I'll let you be the judge of what kind of company you are," Jake replied with a slight smile. "What do you say? Tomorrow afternoon? I could meet you wherever is convenient." Maya found herself agreeing before she had fully processed the decision. Something about his straightforward approach and genuine interest had bypassed her usual defensive mechanisms. They exchanged phone numbers, and Jake promised to text her in the morning to confirm details. As she drove home that evening, Maya replayed the day's events in her mind. She had attended a company social function, provided medical assistance during an emergency, and somehow ended up with a coffee date with a Navy SEAL commander. It felt like something that had happened to someone else, a story she might read about rather than something from her own quiet, predictable life. Back in her apartment, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror and really looked at herself for the first time in months. Same straight black hair, same dark brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, same pale skin that reflected her preference for indoor activities. Nothing had changed about her physical appearance, but something felt different. For a few hours today, she had been seen and appreciated for her competence rather than overlooked for her quietness. She thought about Jake's observation regarding her systematic approach to problem solving, the way he had connected her work to military intelligence analysis. It was the first time anyone had described her professional skills in terms that sounded important or valuable beyond the narrow scope of her current job responsibilities. Maya pulled off her blue cotton shirt and hung it carefully in her closet, then stopped. Something had been nagging at the edge of her consciousness since her conversation with Jake, a sense that she was forgetting something important. She looked down at her arms, which had been covered by her sleeves all day, and suddenly understood what felt different about the afternoon. For the first time in years, she had spent hours in social interaction without being hyper-aware of keeping her arms covered. The medical emergency had required her to focus entirely on someone else's needs, pushing her own self-consciousness into the background. She had acted with confidence and authority, speaking up and taking charge in ways that felt completely foreign to her usual behavior. Maya examined her reflection in the full-length mirror on her closet door, turning her arms to see the intricate tattoo work that covered both forearms from wrist to elbow. The designs were beautiful and meaningful, each element carefully chosen and expertly executed, but they represented a part of herself that she had learned to keep hidden from professional and social scrutiny. The tattoos told a story of loss, resilience, and remembrance that few people in her current life knew about. They were connected to experiences and relationships that predated her carefully constructed invisible existence in San Diego. Looking at them now, Maya wondered what Jake might think if he saw them, whether his interest in getting to know her better would survive learning about the parts of her past that she had worked so hard to keep private. She thought about the casual way he had mentioned his military service, the comfortable confidence with which he moved through social situations, the assumption that people would be interested in his stories and experiences. It represented a kind of openness that Maya hadn't felt safe enough to embrace in years. Tomorrow's coffee date, suddenly, felt much more complicated than a simple social invitation. It represented a potential crack in the protective barrier she had built around herself, an opportunity to be seen more fully by someone whose opinion was already beginning to matter to her in ways she hadn't expected. Maya turned away from the mirror and prepared for bed, her mind spinning with questions about how much of herself she was prepared to reveal to Commander Jake Sullivan, and whether she was ready to risk the comfortable safety of her invisible life for the possibility of genuine human connection. Maya woke at 5:15 the next morning, 45 minutes earlier than usual, her mind immediately jumping to the coffee meeting she had agreed to with Jake. She had spent most of the night alternating between excitement about the unexpected social invitation and anxiety about what he might expect from their conversation. She went through her morning routine with unusual deliberation, spending extra time considering her clothing choices. After trying on and discarding 3 different outfits, she settled on dark jeans and a lightweight cardigan over a simple tank top. The cardigan had long sleeves that would keep her forearms covered while still looking casual and appropriate for a weekend coffee date. Jake texted at 9:30 as promised, suggesting they meet at a small cafe in Balboa Park that Jennifer had recommended. Maya knew the place, a quiet spot with outdoor seating that was popular with locals, but not usually crowded on Sunday afternoons. She agreed to meet him there at 2 o'clock, giving herself several hours to continue second-guessing her decision to accept his invitation. She filled the time with her usual weekend activities, grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning her already spotless apartment. But every task felt like a distraction from the growing nervousness about spending extended time in conversation with someone whose confidence and accomplishments made her acutely aware of her own social limitations. At 1:30, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying a minimal amount of makeup and questioning whether she was making a mistake. Commander Sullivan was clearly accustomed to dealing with highly trained, competent people who operated in high-stakes environments. What would they possibly have to talk about beyond the brief connection they had shared during yesterday's medical emergency? She arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early and chose a table on the outdoor patio, positioning herself where she could see the entrance while maintaining a clear path to escape if the conversation proved too uncomfortable. The afternoon was warm, but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of eucalyptus from the nearby trees. Jake arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, scanning the patio until he spotted her at a corner table. He wore khaki pants and a simple white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, looking relaxed but put together in the effortless way that some people seem to manage without apparent effort. "Maya, thanks for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "This is a nice spot. Very different from the kinds of places I usually grab coffee." "What kind of places do you usually go?" Maya asked, genuinely curious about his normal environment. "Military bases mostly," Jake replied with a slight laugh. "Not known for their charming cafe culture. When we're deployed, coffee comes from whatever equipment we can cobble together in the field. This is definitely an upgrade." A server approached to take their orders. Jake requested a black coffee, while Maya ordered her usual cappuccino, extra hot. As the server walked away, an unexpected silence settled between them that made Maya acutely conscious of her racing heartbeat. "So Jennifer tells me you've been with the company for about 3 years, Jake said, breaking the quiet. "Do you enjoy the work?" "It's interesting," Maya replied, then realized how vague that sounded. "I like the problem-solving aspect. Finding patterns in large data sets. Identifying trends that might not be obvious from surface analysis. There's something satisfying about discovering insights that help the business make better decisions." "That's exactly what I was talking about yesterday," Jake said, leaning forward slightly. "Good intelligence analysis follows the same principles. You gather information from multiple sources, look for patterns and connections, try to predict what might happen next based on historical data and current conditions." Maya found herself relaxing as they discussed the similarities between their analytical approaches. Jake asked thoughtful questions about her work processes, sharing relevant examples from his own experience with mission planning and threat assessment. Despite their very different environments, they discovered surprising common ground in their methodical approaches to complex problems. "The biggest difference is probably the stakes," Jake observed after Maya described a recent project analyzing customer behavior patterns. "When your analysis is wrong, maybe the marketing campaign doesn't perform as well as expected. When mine is wrong, people might die." The stark reality of his statement hit Maya with unexpected force. She had been enjoying their intellectual conversation about data analysis and pattern recognition, but his words reminded her of the life and death responsibilities that shaped his daily experience. "That must be an incredible amount of pressure," she said softly. "It is," Jake agreed, "but it's also why the work matters. Every piece of intelligence we gather, every pattern we identify, every threat we assess correctly might save lives. That sense of purpose makes the pressure worth it." Maya nodded, thinking about her own motivations for the work she did. She had always enjoyed the intellectual challenge of data analysis, but she had never considered whether her efforts contributed to anything beyond corporate profits and operational efficiency. "What got you into the Navy?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression becoming more serious. "My father was career military. Army, multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I grew up hearing stories about the importance of service, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, making a difference in the world. When I was 18, it seemed like the obvious choice. Do you ever regret it?" "Not the choice to serve," Jake said without hesitation. "But the lifestyle is challenging. Long deployments, missing important family events, difficulty maintaining relationships. It requires sacrifices that not everyone is prepared to make." Maya heard something in his voice that suggested personal experience with those sacrifices, but she didn't feel comfortable probing deeper into what might be painful territory. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their coffee orders. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm, ceramic mug, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. She noticed Jake observing her over his cup, not in a way that felt invasive, but with the same careful attention he had shown during yesterday's medical emergency. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said after a few moments. Maya nodded, though her stomach tightened with apprehension about what he might want to know. "Yesterday, when Marcus was having trouble, you responded like someone with a lot more medical training than just 2 years as a college EMT. The way you assessed his condition, made decisions about treatment, managed a crowd of concerned people. That level of competence usually comes from more extensive experience. Maya felt her cheeks warming. She had hoped her handling of the emergency hadn't revealed more about her background than she was prepared to discuss. I guess it's like riding a bicycle, she said carefully. Once you learn the basics, they stay with you. Maybe, Jake said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. Or maybe you have other experience you haven't mentioned. The observation hung between them while Maya debated how much truth she was prepared to share. Part of her wanted to maintain the simple story she had constructed about her life, keeping the complicated parts hidden from view. But another part recognized that Jake had been honest about his own experiences and deserved the same consideration. I spent some time in Afghanistan, she said quietly, the words feeling strange after years of avoiding the topic entirely. Jake's expression changed immediately, his casual interest replaced by sharp attention. Military, civilian contractor, medical support for forward operating bases. 2 tours, about 18 months total. When 2018 to 2019, then again in early 2020. Jake set down his coffee cup and studied her face with new intensity. That would have been during some heavy fighting in Helmand province. Complicated time to be there. Maya nodded, surprised by his knowledge of the specific timeline and location of her deployment. She supposed military personnel would be more aware of operational details than most civilians. What made you decide to go? Jake asked. Maya hesitated, knowing that answering honestly would reveal parts of her story she had spent years avoiding. But Jake's directness and his own military experience made deflection feel dishonest. My brother Danny was killed in Kandahar in 2017, she said, her voice steady despite the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of her loss. He was Army combat medic. After the funeral, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something meaningful with my medical training. Going to Afghanistan felt like a way to honor his service and maybe help prevent other families from going through what we experienced. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Maya worried she had shared too much too quickly. Most people became uncomfortable when she mentioned Danny's death, unsure how to respond to such personal information. I'm sorry for your loss, Jake said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood military casualties were more than statistics. That took a lot of courage, going there after losing your brother. It didn't feel like courage at the time, Maya replied. More like something I had to do. The alternative was sitting at home feeling helpless and angry, and that wasn't sustainable. What was it like? Maya considered how to answer. She had never successfully explained the deployment experience to anyone who hadn't been there themselves. The complexity of emotions, the constant awareness of danger, the intense bonds formed with colleagues, the satisfaction of saving lives mixed with the heartbreak of losing patients despite their best efforts. Intense, she said finally. Everything mattered more because the stakes were so high. We saw terrible injuries, worked impossible hours, lived with the knowledge that every decision could mean life or death for someone's son or daughter or father or mother. But we also did work that made a genuine difference. I was part of medical teams that save hundreds of lives. That experience would explain your response yesterday, Jake observed. You've seen real emergencies under much more challenging conditions. A heat exhaustion case at a company barbecue would feel relatively manageable. Maya nodded, grateful that he understood the connection without her having to explain it explicitly. What made you decide to leave? Jake asked. The second deployment was harder than the first. I had developed close relationships with the medical teams, but I was also seeing the toll that repeated exposure to trauma was taking on everyone. By the end, I was having trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating when I wasn't working. I realized I needed to step back before I became a liability rather than an asset. Maya paused, remembering those final weeks in Afghanistan when every casualty had felt personal, when she had started questioning whether she was still helping or simply feeding her own need to stay connected to Danny's memory. Coming home was almost as difficult as being deployed, she continued. I felt disconnected from civilian life, like I had experiences that no one else could understand. The work I could find in the medical field felt trivial after what I had been doing overseas. Eventually, I moved to San Diego and transitioned into data analysis because it required similar skills but without the emotional intensity. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Transition back to civilian life is challenging for everyone who's served overseas, whether military or civilian. The pace is different, the priorities feel strange. Relationships with people who haven't shared those experiences can be complicated. Exactly, Maya said, surprised by how accurately he had captured her post-deployment struggles. I built a quiet life here because it felt safe and manageable. No high stakes, no life and death decisions, no intense personal connections that might be painful to lose. That's understandable, Jake said, but it might also be limiting you from connections and experiences that could be meaningful in different ways. Maya looked at him carefully, wondering if his observation was meant to apply to their current situation. She was beginning to understand that her carefully constructed invisible existence, while safe and predictable, had also isolated her from opportunities for growth and relationship that might be worthwhile despite the inherent risks. "Can I ask you something now?" Maya said. Jake nodded. "Yesterday, when you introduced yourself, you mentioned that Jennifer invited you because you're between deployments. How long are you in San Diego?" 3 weeks, Jake replied. Then, back to Virginia for training before the next assignment. The timeline hit Maya with unexpected disappointment. She had been beginning to enjoy his company, to imagine that their coffee date might lead to additional conversations and perhaps a genuine friendship. Learning that he would be leaving soon reminded her why she had learned to avoid forming attachments that were likely to be temporary. "That's not very long," she said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "No, it's not," Jake agreed. "Military life doesn't allow for much stability when it comes to location or relationships. It's one of the sacrifices I mentioned earlier." They finished their coffee while discussing lighter topics. Maya's favorite hiking trails around San Diego, Jake's impressions of the area during his brief visit, books they had read recently. The conversation felt natural and comfortable despite the underlying awareness that their time was limited. As they prepared to leave, Jake asked if she would be interested in meeting again before he left San Diego. Maya found herself saying yes despite her rational mind's warnings about the futility of developing feelings for someone who would soon be thousands of miles away. "There's a sunset hiking trail I'd like to try if you're willing to show me around," Jake suggested. "Torrey Pines, maybe?" Maya agreed, and they made plans to meet the following weekend for an afternoon hike. As they walked toward the parking area, Maya felt a familiar sense of exposure that came with allowing someone to see beneath her carefully maintained surface. "Maya," Jake said as they reached her car, "thank you for sharing your story about Afghanistan. I know that's not easy to talk about." "Thank you for understanding why it mattered," Maya replied. Jake paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I want you to know that what you did over there, the lives you helped save, that service was just as meaningful as any soldier's. Civilian contractors don't always get the recognition they deserve for the risks they take and the contributions they make." Maya felt tears threatening at the unexpected validation. She had spent years minimizing her own service, feeling like an outsider to both military and civilian communities. Having her experiences acknowledged by someone whose opinion she was beginning to value felt deeply significant. "That means a lot coming from you," she said quietly. As she drove home, Maya reflected on how much her self-perception had shifted over the course of a single afternoon. Jake's questions and observations had reminded her of capabilities and experiences she had been downplaying for years. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, she began to consider whether her invisible existence might be as much about fear as it was about preference. The following week passed with unusual anticipation as Maya looked forward to their planned hike. She found herself paying more attention to her appearance, considering what someone like Jake might find interesting about her beyond their shared understanding of high-stakes medical situations. But she also found herself increasingly aware of the parts of herself she was still keeping hidden. Jake had responded positively to learning about her deployment experience, but there were other aspects of her past and personality that felt more vulnerable to share. Her tattoos remained covered by long sleeves, even when they met for coffee a second time midweek, and she continued to present herself as the quiet, reserved data analyst rather than revealing the more complex person she had been before. Grief and trauma had convinced her that invisibility was preferable to vulnerability. As their hiking date approached, Maya wrestled with questions about how much authenticity their developing relationship could accommodate, and whether she was brave enough to find out. The morning of their planned hike dawned clear and warm, with the kind of perfect San Diego weather that made Maya grateful to live near the ocean. She had spent considerable time choosing appropriate hiking clothes, finally settling on lightweight pants and a long-sleeved, moisture-wicking shirt that would keep her comfortable during the afternoon heat while maintaining her usual coverage. Jake had suggested they start at the Torrey Pines State Natural Reserve, a location Maya knew well from her solitary weekend walks but had never experienced with company. The trail system offered several options for different difficulty levels and time commitments, giving them flexibility to adjust their plans based on how their conversation developed. Maya arrived at the trailhead parking area 15 minutes early, using the extra time to apply sunscreen and organize her small backpack with water, snacks, and basic first aid supplies. The familiar ritual of preparation helped calm her nerves about spending several hours in Jake's company outside the structured environment of their coffee meetings. Jake pulled into the parking space beside her precisely on time, emerging from his rental car wearing hiking boots, shorts, and a navy t-shirt that emphasized his athletic build. Maya noticed several scars on his legs and arms that suggested his military service had included more than just analytical and planning responsibilities. Perfect day for this, Jake said, shouldering his own backpack and surveying the landscape of sandstone cliffs, native vegetation, and ocean views that stretched toward the horizon. I can see why you like coming here. It's one of my favorite places in San Diego, Maya replied. Peaceful, but not boring. Challenging enough to feel like exercise, but not so difficult that you can't enjoy the scenery. They chose the Guy Fleming Trail, a moderate loop that would take them through different ecosystems while providing spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. As they began walking, Maya felt some of her social anxiety dissolving into the comfortable rhythm of physical activity and natural conversation. Jennifer mentioned you've been in San Diego for several years, Jake said as they followed the path through a grove of Torrey pine trees. Do you think you'll stay long-term? I haven't really thought about leaving, Maya replied honestly. I like the climate, the job market is good for my field, and I've built a comfortable routine here. What about you? Do you have a home base somewhere? Or does the military keep you moving constantly? Officially, I'm based in Virginia, but I spend more time deployed than I do there, Jake said. I have an apartment near the base that mostly serves as storage for things I can't take with me. It's not exactly what most people would consider a home. Maya tried to imagine living without the stability of a consistent physical space, belongings that stayed in the same place, routines that provided structure and predictability. The idea felt both liberating and terrifying. Do you ever want to settle down somewhere? She asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, navigating a rocky section of trail before responding. I used to think I'd stay military until retirement, then figure out what normal life looked like afterward. But lately, I've been wondering if waiting 25 years to start building a real home might mean missing out on other things that matter. Something in his tone made Maya glance at him sideways, wondering if their developing friendship had influenced his thoughts about the future. The possibility that their connection might be affecting his long-term plans felt both thrilling and concerning, given the inevitable limitations of their situation. They reached a scenic overlook where the trail offered panoramic views of the ocean and coastlines stretching in both directions. Jake suggested they take a break to enjoy the scenery and share the snacks they had brought. Maya settled on a large rock formation that provided natural seating while Jake distributed water bottles from his pack. This is incredible, Jake said, surveying the vista. I've been all over the world, but this might be one of the most beautiful places I've seen. I come here when I need perspective, Maya said. Something about the combination of land and sea and sky makes personal problems feel smaller and more manageable. They ate trail mix and energy bars while watching surfers navigate the waves below and pelicans glide along the cliff tops. Maya found herself relaxing into the moment, enjoying Jake's company without the constant background awareness of time limitations and impending separation that had colored their previous meetings. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jake said after they had been sitting quietly for several minutes. Maya's stomach tightened slightly, but she nodded. "You mentioned that you built a quiet life here because it felt safe after your deployment experience. But from what I've observed, you seem to keep people at a distance even beyond normal introvert preferences. Is that related to what happened overseas, or are there other reasons you've chosen isolation?" The question was more direct than Maya had expected, and more perceptive than she was comfortable with. Jake had correctly identified that her social withdrawal went beyond simple personality preferences to something more deliberate and protective. "It's complicated," Maya said, buying time while she decided how honest to be. "Most meaningful things are complicated," Jake replied. "I'm not asking you to reveal anything you're not ready to share. But I get the sense that you're hiding parts of yourself that might be worth showing to the right people." Maya looked out at the ocean, considering his words. Over the past 2 weeks, Jake had proven himself to be trustworthy, understanding, and genuinely interested in knowing her beyond surface-level interactions. If anyone deserved to see more of who she really was, it would be him. But revealing the hidden aspects of her identity felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "When I came back from Afghanistan, I felt like I didn't fit anywhere," Maya said slowly. "Too intense for civilian friendships, not military enough for veteran communities. I had experiences and perspectives that made normal social interactions feel artificial and exhausting. Keeping people at a distance was easier than trying to explain why I couldn't relate to their concerns about workplace drama or relationship problems." Jake nodded, his expression suggesting he understood the isolation that could follow intense shared experiences. "That makes sense, but it also sounds lonely." "It is lonely sometimes," Maya admitted, "but lonely feels safer than vulnerable." "What would make vulnerable feel safer?" Maya turned to look at him directly, struck by the thoughtfulness of his question. Instead of trying to convince her that vulnerability was worth the risk, he was asking what conditions might make it feel possible. "Finding people who understand that everyone has complicated histories," she said after considering his question. "People who don't expect you to be simple or easy to categorize. Like people who have their own complicated histories." "Maybe." They resumed hiking after finishing their snacks, following the trail as it wound through different terrain and vegetation zones. Maya found herself walking slightly closer to Jake than she had at the beginning of their hike, her comfort level with his presence gradually expanding as their conversation continued. "You know," Jake said as they navigated a particularly scenic section of coastline trail, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding finding people who understand complexity. Military service teaches you that most people are much more complicated than they appear on the surface. Some of the toughest, most competent people I've worked with have also been dealing with personal challenges that would surprise you." "What do you mean?" "I've served with Navy SEALs who write poetry, Special Forces medics who are classically trained musicians, intelligence analysts who volunteer at animal shelters every weekend. People contain multitudes, even when their professional roles or public personas suggest otherwise." Maya understood that Jake was trying to tell her something about acceptance and the possibility that revealing hidden aspects of herself might not result in rejection or judgment. His message was gentle but clear. Authenticity might be safer than she had convinced herself. They were approaching the end of their planned loop when Jake stopped suddenly, pointing toward a section of trail that branched off from their main path. "That looks like it leads to another viewpoint," he said. "Do you want to check it out?" "We have time if you're not getting tired," Maya agreed, and they followed the side trail for about 10 minutes until it opened onto a secluded overlook with stunning views of the ocean and surrounding landscape. The spot felt more private than the earlier scenic stops, surrounded by native vegetation that created a natural shelter from wind and provided a sense of peaceful isolation. "This is perfect," Jake said, settling onto a natural rock bench that faced the water. "I can see why you love this place." Maya sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The physical proximity felt natural and comfortable, a significant change from her usual discomfort with personal space invasion. They sat quietly for several minutes, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below and seabirds navigate the coastal winds. Maya felt a sense of contentment that had been rare in her carefully constructed solitary life, combined with an awareness that moments like this were exactly what she had been avoiding through her commitment to emotional self-protection. "Maya," Jake said quietly, "I want to tell you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured to respond in any particular way." Maya's heart rate increased as she waited for whatever he was planning to share. "Spending time with you these past 2 weeks has been the most enjoyable part of my leave," Jake continued. "Not just because you're interesting and intelligent, though you are both of those things, but because you make me feel like I can be myself without having to perform or live up to anyone's expectations about what a military officer should be like." Maya turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his admission. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding building a real home instead of waiting until retirement," Jake continued. "And I've been wondering if the right person might be worth making some changes to my long-term plans." The implication of his words hit Maya with a mixture of joy and terror. Jake was suggesting that their connection had become significant enough to influence his future decisions, but accepting that gift would require her to reveal the parts of herself she had been protecting. "Jake," Maya said softly, "there are things about me that you don't know. Parts of my story that might change how you feel about the person you think I am." "Like what?" Maya took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether their relationship could develop into something real or whether her secrets would create distance that couldn't be bridged. "When I was deployed in Afghanistan, I wasn't just providing medical support," she said. "I was also dealing with my own trauma and grief in ways that weren't always healthy. I have reminders of that time that are visible." Jake watched her carefully, his expression attentive but not alarmed. "What kind of reminders?" Instead of answering verbally, Maya slowly rolled up the sleeves of her long-sleeve shirt, exposing the intricate tattoo work that covered both forearms from wrist to elbow. The designs were complex and beautiful, incorporating military medical symbols, memorial elements for her brother Danny, Afghan poppies, coordinates of significant locations, and text in both English and Pashto. Jake's eyes widened as he took in the extent and artistry of the tattoo work, but his expression remained interested rather than shocked or disapproving. "These are incredible," he said after studying the designs carefully. "The detail work is amazing. Did you have them done in Afghanistan?" "Some of them," Maya replied, surprised by his positive reaction. "I started with a small memorial piece for Danny, but over time I added more elements. The poppies represent the landscape. The coordinates mark places where we saved lives. The medical symbols honor the work we did. It became a way of processing everything I couldn't talk about. And you've been hiding them because they don't fit with the professional image I'm supposed to maintain. Because they raise questions about my past that I haven't wanted to answer. Because they make me visible in ways that feel vulnerable and complicated." Jake gently took one of her hands, turning her arm to examine the tattoo work more closely. His touch was careful and respectful, focused on appreciating the artistry rather than claiming ownership of her space. "These tell a story about who you are and what you've experienced," he said. "They represent strength and service and remembrance." "Why would you want to hide something so meaningful?" "Because most people don't see them that way," Maya replied. "They see unprofessional decoration or signs of poor judgment or evidence that I'm not the quiet, appropriate person I pretend to be at work. Then, Most people are idiots, Jake said matter-of-factly. These are beautiful and meaningful, and they're part of what makes you who you are. Anyone who judges you negatively for honoring your service and your brother's memory doesn't deserve to know you anyway. Maya felt tears forming as Jake's acceptance washed over her. She had spent years anticipating rejection and judgment if anyone discovered the hidden aspects of her identity. But Jake's response was everything she had hoped for but hadn't dared expect. "There's more," Maya said, wanting to be completely honest now that he had proven himself trustworthy with her most guarded secret. "What else?" "The quiet, reserved person you've gotten to know isn't entirely real," Maya admitted. "Before Danny died, before Afghanistan, I was different. More outgoing, more confident, more willing to take risks and put myself out there. I chose to become invisible because it felt safer, but it's also meant hiding parts of my personality that might be worth recovering." Jake smiled, the first genuinely broad smile she had seen from him during their time together. "I was hoping you might say something like that." "What do you mean?" "I could see glimpses of someone more dynamic underneath the careful control," Jake explained. "The way you took charge during the medical emergency, the passion in your voice when you talk about work you care about, the way you move when you think no one is watching. I was hoping that person was still there, just protected rather than gone." Maya realized that Jake had been seeing through her protective persona from the beginning, recognizing potential she had convinced herself no longer existed. "If I stopped hiding those parts of myself, if I let you see who I really am, would you still be interested in changing your long-term plans?" Maya asked. "I'd be more interested," Jake replied without hesitation. "The person you've shown me so far is fascinating. The complete version sounds like someone worth building a life with." As they walked back toward the parking area, Maya felt like she was seeing the familiar landscape with new eyes. Jake walked beside her with one of her hands in his, both of them occasionally stopping to point out interesting plants or wildlife they had missed on the way up the trail. "So what happens now?" Maya asked as they reached their cars. "Now we figure out how to make this work," Jake said. "I have 2 more weeks here. Then I have to go back to Virginia. But maybe it's time for me to have some serious conversations with my commanding officers about my next assignment preferences." "What would that mean?" "It would mean finding out if there are positions available on the West Coast," Jake explained. "Navy bases in San Diego, special operations units that could use someone with my experience. It might take some time to arrange, but if you're willing to see where this goes, I'm willing to figure out how to make geography less of an obstacle." Maya felt a combination of hope and terror about the implications of his suggestion. Having Jake relocate to be closer to her would represent a level of commitment and expectation that she hadn't experienced in years. But it would also mean the possibility of building something real with someone who had seen her completely and chosen to stay. "I'd like to see where this goes," Maya said quietly. Jake smiled and pulled her closer, kissing her softly in the parking lot of Torrey Pines while the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink behind them. 6 months later, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror getting ready for work. But instead of automatically reaching for a long-sleeve shirt, she chose a short-sleeve blouse that left her tattoos clearly visible. Jake had been stationed in San Diego for 3 months, having successfully requested a transfer to a special operations unit based at Naval Base Coronado. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully, with both of them learning to balance their professional responsibilities with their commitment to building something lasting together. Maya had gradually become more comfortable with visibility, both in her personal life and at work, where her colleagues had eventually learned to see her tattoos as interesting conversation starters rather than problematic distractions. She had also started volunteering with a local organization that provided support services for military families, using her deployment experience and medical background to help other people navigate the challenges of service and transition. The work felt meaningful in ways that connected her past experiences with her current life, integrating rather than hiding the different aspects of her identity. Jake appeared in the doorway behind her, already dressed in his uniform and preparing for his own workday. "You look beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I look like myself," Maya replied, still sometimes surprised by how natural authenticity had begun to feel. "Same thing," Jake said, kissing the top of her head before releasing her to finish getting ready. As Maya drove to work, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the day she had reluctantly attended a company barbecue and ended up providing medical assistance to a colleague. That single moment of visibility had led to connections and possibilities she couldn't have imagined from the safety of her carefully constructed, invisible existence. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake as she pulled into her office parking lot. "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about your presentation to the new clients." Maya smiled as she typed her response, "Absolutely. I have stories." She gathered her materials for the day and headed into the office building, no longer worried about being noticed or standing out from her colleagues. For the first time in years, Maya-chan was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly the person she wanted to be there with, living as exactly who she was meant to be.